Next presentation, the speaker is Tobias Vente. It is another paper, another reproducibility presentation. The title is From Clicks to Carbon, the Environmental Toll of Recommender Systems. Oh, yeah, we have two speakers.
Yeah, hello everyone. Today I'm going to give a talk about our paper, From Clicks to Carbon, the Environmental Toll of Recommender Systems. And I know it's late, but I have a question. What would you think? How much do experiments for a single recommender system paper emit in kilograms of CO2? Any idea? Yeah, well, I didn't have an idea either when I started this, and it's actually quite a hard question, but we found out that a single paper emits, on average, 3,297 kilograms of CO2 equivalents. And I'm quite sure that this number doesn't help a lot of you, but this is the same as one person flying from New York to Melbourne, or what a single tree can sequester in more than 300 years. But I guess we need to clarify a bit, because the devices that I use to run experiments, they don't emit CO2, right? I don't have an exhaust on my device. But how it works is they consume electricity, and electricity needs to be generated. And there are multiple ways of electricity generation. Some are good for the environment or better for the environment, and others are worse. But in general, what all of these have in common, they emit some form of gases. And these gases can be carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, or methane, to give a few examples. Actually, there are plenty more, but they didn't fit the slide. And each of these gases, they have a different impact on the environment. So to simplify here a bit, we are talking about CO2 equivalents. And CO2 equivalents is the amount of CO2 that represents the same environmental impact as the combination of gases that is emitted by the respective electricity generation process. And when we started this whole project, the very first thing that we did, oh yeah, this is how they're connected. When we started this whole process, the very first thing that we did was we analyzed all 47 full papers from last year's RecSys, and we wanted to know which are the most frequently used algorithms. And what you can see on the y-axis are just these. And on the x-axis, you have the average energy consumption averaged over 12 data sets. And as well as we found the most commonly used algorithms, we also found the most commonly used data sets that we used for our experiments. And generally speaking, an algorithm, one run of an algorithm consumes 0.5 kilowatt hours of electricity. And the algorithm choice in this scenario pretty much matters, because based on the algorithm that you select, there is a difference of up to a factor of 257 times based on the algorithm selection. And with some algorithms exceeding 6 kilowatt hours per run. And if I'm saying an algorithm run, I mean the training time, the prediction time, and the evaluation of the specific algorithm. And as you can see, these two dots that are circled here, these represent one algorithm executed on one data set. So we can also read the impact of the data set selection that we have. So based on the data set, there is a factor of 1,444 based on the data set selection. But that's not all. I mean, generally speaking, if you want to know if one algorithm is better than the other, the longer an algorithm trains and the longer it takes for predictions, the worse it is. And there is a very linear trend, I would say. So we executed the algorithms on multiple machines. In our case, a modern workstation using an NVIDIA GPU, an Mac Studio using an M2 chip, and a MacBook Pro with an M1. And as you can see on the y-axis, we have the energy consumed, and on the x-axis, you have the runtime. So there is a huge difference in runtime, but if we take one example out of this, so if we compare the modern workstation with the NVIDIA GPU compared to our MacBook Pro with M1, we can see that the modern workstation is actually 3 times faster than the MacBook Pro. Yeah, so the NVIDIA GPU does its job, it's quite fast. But the interesting part is the MacBook Pro just takes 1/10 of the energy on average. So if you're willing to spend a bit more time waiting for your results, you can actually save lots of energy. And it's not just the hardware or the architecture that you use that matters, but it's also the location, because every country has their own grid of electricity, and every country or region relies on different electricity sources. So depending on where you are, this has an impact on how much CO2 it emits. So on the x-axis you can see the CO2 equivalents that are emitted, and on the y-axis you can see different regions from where RecSys papers are submitted. And for now, let's just focus on the blue bars, because every of those blue bars represents a modern recommender system algorithm that is running on a GPU. And you can see that depending on where you execute it, it has more or less CO2 emitted. We, for example, we run all of our experiments in Sweden to kind of mitigate the effects of running so many experiments. And what we also did, and I think this is kind of a nice idea, we paid an organization to plant more trees to offset the CO2 that we emitted during our experiments. And the difficult part at this point, because this is a high simplification, it's actually much more complex, because if you use data centers, sometimes they have their own energy source, and then this mix it up a bit. And on the other hand, if we focus on the orange parts, on the orange bars, these are typical algorithms that were used in 2013, and they usually relied on CPU. Yeah, and we found that in the past 10 years, or by now it's 11 years, there is a factor of 42. So an average algorithm that we used last year emits 42 times more emissions than 10 years, or by now 11 years ago. And I have to say, we didn't include LLMs yet. So to give you the main takeaways. First of all, on average, a recommender system paper emits 3,297 kilograms of CO2 emissions. That's a 42 times emission increase compared to recommender systems papers from 2013. And as you could see, certain hardware configurations are just way better for the environment. If you're interested in how we measured the electricity, we have a paper on Friday in the RecSys Good workshop. It's called EMERS, and there we explain in detail the tool that we implemented and how you can use it to measure the electricity consumption for your experiments as well. Then I really need to thank my co-authors, Lukas, which is here on stage, Ellen and Joeran. It was a great support, and due to time constraints, we couldn't place all of our comparisons and results in the slides. So if you want to know, for example, if an algorithm that consumes more energy also has better performance, you can just scan the QR code and read the paper. And last but not least, if you're generally interested in green RecSys or sustainable RecSys, we have plenty more submissions at this year's RecSys workshops. They're all on Friday, so if you follow more talks about this topic, yeah, go ahead and visit us.
So thanks for the presentation. I think this topic is really hot because there are many questions online on Slideo. So we have the time for just two of them, but yeah, my suggestion is to go on with the discussion online. So the first question is more of a curiosity. How much carbon, CO2 you have consumed for your paper? And the second question is how did you collect all the data? What kind of approach did you use to collect all of this data?
Well, to answer the first question, well, I don't have the precise number in my head, but it's in the paper, and it was about, I think, 3 times as much as a single recommender systems paper usually would emit if we would run it anywhere on Earth, but because we run it in Sweden and we offset it, it was way less. And the second part is how we collected the data, we just run them all. So we re-implemented these pipelines and we executed them and we measured the electricity and then converted them into CO2 emissions.
So there are many other questions online, and thanks again for this very interesting talk. And we can thank the speaker again.